Hello. We are nearing the end of this unit over early civilization and the rise of civilizations. We've looked at the traits of civilizations, why agriculture is and was necessary to allow civilizations to develop, and the benefits agriculture gives to humanity in general. And we're going to finish the unit off by looking at um, the main traits and characteristics of the four early river civilizations, or the first four civilizations that developed along these lines after the development of agriculture. So the first one we're going to look at is Mesopotamia. Now, Mesopotamia is the oldest civilization that we have a record of existing. There may have been civilizations prior to Mesopotamia, but we don't have any records of them, so we have no way of knowing that. So, for all intents and purposes, Mesopotamia is the oldest civilization, or the earliest civilization to develop. Now, Mesopotamia was located in the Fertile Crescent in present day Iraq, and specifically located between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Hence why Mesopotamia was called Mesopotamia. It literally means the land between the rivers. So, other than being located between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, there really wasn't a whole lot of other natural barriers. There really weren't a lot of other natural barriers around Mesopotamia. And because of that, Mesopotamian society was, in general, pretty chaotic and unstable and unpredictable. On top of that, the rivers would flood unpredictably. So life in Mesopotamia was pretty unpredictable. Because of the lack of natural barriers, Mesopotamia experienced near constant warfare. There was always some fighting going on somewhere in Mesopotamia for a couple of reasons. One, because there were no natural barriers to keep invaders out, but also the political structure of Mesopotamia did not discourage fighting or didn't prevent war or conflict from breaking out. And that's because Mesopotamia was organized and divided up into separate city-states, as opposed to being set up and structured under one single overarching kingdom. Mesopotamia was a lot like ancient Greece in the fact that it was divided up into a bunch of small city-states that shared a common culture, but at the same time frequently attacked and fought each other. So, these factors, again, the lack of natural barriers and the fact that Mesopotamia was organized into a system of city-states, they didn't really encourage or foster stability in Mesopotamian politics. Even though again, Mesopotamia was divided up into separate city-states, the city-states were remarkably similar in terms of their culture and their social structures. They did have a pretty rigid system and set of social classes, which Hammurabi's code illustrates. Again, your social class would determine how the law affected you and what laws applied to you. Again, we can see the differences between laws and how they applied to free people and how they applied to slaves. Within the city-states, leadership was kind of shared between kings and priests. And this indicates a heavy intertwinement of religion and government in the Mesopotamian city-states, where the priests either shared power with the king or were just slightly less powerful than the king. Speaking of Mesopotamian religion, Mesopotamians practiced a form of polytheism, meaning they worshipped multiple gods. And there were a number of different gods that the Mesopotamians worshipped. Some of them were more general and overarching that all Mesopotamians worshipped, whereas others were more unique to certain city-states, where certain city-states would worship certain gods. But either way, all Mesopotamians practiced a form of polytheism. And in general, the chaotic and unpredictability of Mesopotamian life influenced the Mesopotamian view towards religion. The Mesopotamians believed their gods were rather fickle and at times outright cruel. And frequently, they believe the gods would inflict misfortune and just calamity on humanity. And as such, the Mesopotamians believed that humans must live in total servitude towards their gods in order to prevent the gods, dissuade the gods from just wiping humanity out. So, not a very pleasant outlook on the world, but it makes sense given the rampant chaos and unpredictability of Mesopotamian life. The Mesopotamians did have a system of writing known as cuneiform that we haven't really deciphered, but the Mesopotamian society did develop its own independent set of written language, which is pretty impressive. Okay. Next society we're going to look at is Egypt. Get this here. Okay. Okay. So Egypt, like Mesopotamia, like all these civilizations, was located and centered around a river. In Egypt's case, it was centered around the Nile River. And the Nile River was very, very important for Egyptian culture and society because if you look at Egypt today, even back then, Egypt is basically a giant desert with this lone stretch of really rich and fertile farmland running near the banks of the Nile River. So the ancient Egyptian civilization was located and clustered pretty close to the Nile River. And it really had to be, because if you got too far away from the Nile, you were in the desert, and there was no way at that time to even possibly have a civilization succeed in the desert. However, the Nile was and is an incredibly rich source. The Nile does feed some pretty rich farmland, and as such, if you locate yourself close to the Nile, you can really take advantage of all that rich, fertile farmland. Another, a benefit of the desert location, though, was that the deserts actually acted as a form of natural barrier. So, unlike Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt really didn't get attacked a whole lot because it was too difficult for invaders to try and cross the desert. Especially in ancient times, crossing deserts was really difficult and dangerous. You had to know exactly where you were going to go. You had to make sure you were properly supplied because there was no way to resupply in the desert. So if you got lost or you ran out of supplies, you were in trouble. Okay. Now, kind of stemming from the fact that Egypt wasn't attacked as often, and that unlike the Tigris and Euphrates, the Nile was not nearly as unpredictable or destructive, the Egyptians had a very stable and orderly society and a more orderly view of the universe. Unlike Mesopotamia, Egypt was unified into a single kingdom, which was organized under this fusion of monarchy and theocracy in terms of government. So just as a refresher, a government that is a monarchy utilizes a hereditary chain of leadership, notably usually kings and queens, where basically when the king dies, his firstborn son will become the new king. So monarchies, it's hereditary, leadership is inherited. Whereas with a theocracy, it's a government that is heavily intertwined with religion. Now, the reason ancient Egypt is kind of both of these things is because their leader, the pharaoh, was what is referred to as a god king, meaning that his subjects and his followers believed that he was a god, and as such, the pharaoh was not only followed and respected as a king, but also he was worshipped as a god. Now, the pharaoh was not the only god the ancient Egyptians worshipped. Like the Mesopotamians, the ancient Egyptians practiced a form of polytheism where they worshipped over 2,000 different gods. And also, like the Mesopotamians, the Egyptians did develop a system of writing, which we call hieroglyphics. Unlike cuneiform, though, we can actually kind of read hieroglyphics thanks to the Rosetta Stone, which enabled us to start decoding and translating hieroglyphics into languages that we can actually read and understand. Okay, so the third civilization, actually, it'll work fine right here, is the Indus civilization, which is kind of unknown, and not a whole lot is known about the Indus civilization. There aren't a lot of records left behind by it. We know that it existed, and we know a few things about it, but we don't really have the same level of detail that we have about the other three civilizations. The Indus civilization was located along the Indus River in present-day India, and as I've said, very little is known about this civilization. We know they had a system of social classes, but we don't really know what those social classes were. We also know, or we have reason to believe that their government was a form of theocracy and that they practiced a version of polytheism, but we don't really have specifics. They were, it appears to be, the most urbanized of the early civilizations, with archaeological expeditions uncovering remnants of what appear to be planned out cities, or cities designed in accordance to urban planning, and even precursor sewage systems to use running water to carry waste out of the city, which is pretty advanced for the time. The Indus civilization does have a system, or did have a system of writing, but it's undeciphered. We do not know what the system of writing was. We cannot read it at all. The last civilization is actually the oldest civilization on Earth, because a number of the traits of it still exist today, and that is China. So modern day China culturally still has a lot of elements of ancient China in its cultural influences. Now, its government and social structure are pretty much completely different, but a number of elements from the culture of ancient China have continued and persisted until this day. Now, ancient China did not encompass the entire territory of modern-day China. Ancient China was really focused between the Yellow and the Yangtze rivers. And because of deserts to the north and mountains to the west, China was effectively totally isolated from the rest of the world. So this had a number of benefits as well as drawbacks. The benefits were, since China was totally isolated, it was never really attacked from the outside. But the big drawback of that is they couldn't trade with anybody else. So basically, whatever they needed, they had to find a way to develop or make themselves. They could not trade with anybody else. Also, unlike Egypt, just because China was isolated and protected by natural barriers, that did not mean it escaped conflict and warfare. Ancient China did experience actually quite a lot of fighting and warfare. And a lot of that stems from the structure of its government in the system known as feudalism. We are going to be talking a lot about feudalism when we look at the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages in Europe. But feudalism actually originated in China, and the gist of feudalism essentially works where in this case, the emperor would give nobles land to govern for him. In exchange, the nobles were to give the emperor their loyalty, and if the emperor needed their armies to fight for him, the nobles were supposed to let the emperor use their army. Now, the plus side of feudalism is that it is a more effective way to govern larger empires and larger societies in this time period, because if you think about the time it took to communicate and travel from place to place, it would be too impractical to govern a large kingdom or a large empire any other way. The drawback is you're giving a lot of power to the nobles, who would frequently try and oppose the emperor, either trying to dethrone the emperor and take the throne for themselves, or simply trying to be more independent from the emperor. So because of that, China did experience a lot of fighting stemming from its practice and government of feudalism, where, again, just to remind you, the emperor gave the nobles territory, and they would govern the territory for the emperor. Notably, this led to a period of all-out civil war between the emperor and nobles, the emperor and the nobility, known as the period of warring states, where there was a massive power struggle fighting for the throne and fighting to receive what the Chinese referred to as the Mandate of Heaven. So the Mandate of Heaven essentially functioned as a way to legitimize the rule of the emperor. Or basically, the argument was that the emperor was in charge because the gods picked the emperor to be in charge. If the gods did not want the emperor to be in charge, if the emperor did not have the Mandate of Heaven, he would not be emperor. He would be dethroned. So the Mandate of Heaven was a way to legitimize the rule of emperors, but it also served as a way to legitimize challenges to the throne, where if the emperor was able to successfully resist a challenge to the throne, it was believed that the emperor still possessed the Mandate of Heaven. But if somebody else was able to successfully overthrow him, it was believed that the old emperor had lost the Mandate of Heaven and this newcomer had earned it in place. If the newcomer had not earned the Mandate of Heaven, the theory was that the newcomer would not have been able to successfully challenge or overthrow the emperor. From a religion standpoint, ancient China practiced a blend of polytheism along with a heavy influence of ancestor worship, where the influence of ancestors and the belief in spirits heavily guided and influenced the way the Chinese carried on their lives. And the ancestor worship reflects on the cultural importance of the family. The family was the most important institution, or the most important social institution in China. And even in Chinese culture today, the family it takes a center focus in Chinese culture today. And within the family, the father was the head of the family and made most of the decisions, and it was the responsibility of all the other members of the family to follow the father's leadership because the father knew what was best for the family. And this emphasis on the family actually reinforced this concept of the Mandate of Heaven and reinforced subservience to the emperor, where the ancient Chinese essentially viewed the entire kingdom as one big family with the emperor as their father. So as such, it was their responsibility to follow the leadership of the emperor because he knew what was best for the greater family that was China as a whole. Okay, now you are going to have some questions over these four civilizations. Just as a refresher or a reminder, well, not even a refresher, just to review and make sure you've been paying attention to this lecture. This will set you up nicely for a test over this unit over early civilization, either towards the end of this week or the beginning of next week. So if you have any questions, send me an email. If not, we'll talk to you later.